Hey guys, my name is Ryan and welcome to HitScan. Before we get started in today's video, I did want to let you know that we have the dates of the next event. The Year of the Rat is starting tomorrow, actually, the 16th of January, and we'll be going on to Feb the 5th. We saw this little video like I'm showing you on the screen, but this Hanzo skin isn't new, so we haven't really seen it any much more than that. So I wanted to keep it a brief mention at the start of this video. We had a very lengthy response coming out of Jeff Kaplan with a huge developer update on effectively what they're working on at the moment. And it's a pretty radical change, that being a pretty significant change to Rollock, going from 222 to 1 tank, 3 damage, and 2 support. This was a post that had 1700 words and almost 10,000 characters, but we're not going to be reading through all of it. It highlights a lot of the challenges that developers have all of the time. It really does give us a good idea on just what Blizzard are doing at the moment, but I think it's reading between the lines that show us a new Blizzard almost in 2020, something that we really didn't see a lot of in 2019 at all. There are a few main points that I want to go over, but I do want to highlight this post very quickly, just going over some of the main quotes. In early December, we were brainstorming ways to shorten the DPS queue, and the idea was proposed to try changing the role queue composition to be 1 tank, 3 damage, and 2 support. Our matchmaking engineers did some modeling around queue times, expected behaviors, etc., and all indications point to an overall positive improvement to all queue times under a scenario like that. The main point there is shortening DPS queue times. Internally, for the past 2 months, we changed the game to be based on this composition. When we queue for our playtests, we only get 1 tank per team for each match. We decided to live with it for December and January because we felt the easy and natural thing for all of us to do is to just say, hey, this is different, and here are all of the problems with it, and dismiss the system. But by forcing the team to try it out and live with it for so long, it's challenged us to try and solve some of the problems that have surfaced. That is important. We'll go over why in a second. At the end of this, it says, it's been a really interesting and fun experiment. We're not really confident that this is the correct thing for the game. It solves a lot of problems, but also introduces a lot of problems too, like most things in the world of game design. I'm really proud of the Overwatch team for experimenting with it for the past 2 months. We're really conflicted on it, so it was cool to see you bring up the idea. This whole post came from a reply to somebody else suggesting it. We'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on it. We've also been brainstorming if there's a way to bring this experiment to the community somehow, either through the PTR or the live game. We don't want to freak people out though. Usually when stuff hits the PTR, we intend for it to go live or some version of it, but this is much more of an early experiment more than anything else. So this is Blizzard saying that they have spent the last 2 months making this huge drastic change to Rollock, and then saying that it's probably not coming, but they may introduce it to the PTR. Now, I did want to highlight this first because I even think it said in this article that the whole idea of this was very dismissive, and a lot of people said that it was a stupid idea before even playing it. Something that I've seen a lot of on the forums, on Twitter, on Reddit, no doubt in the comments too. You guys are more than entitled to say, hey, I am a tank player and this idea sounds horrible, because certainly from a tank player's perspective, it does. But I do want to see this and play this for myself personally, and I think that this is a really important reason as to why. Jeff Kaplan said this as well in the article. The odd thing about testing this is that when we started, everybody treated it like one of Jeff's crazy experiments. It was super different, challenging, and possibly a stupid idea. Jeff tried to calm people down by saying that most of the matches in Overwatch's history since launch up until the release of Rollock were actually just played with 1 tank or less. After a few of the early playtests in December, one developer gave feedback saying that it felt like old school Overwatch, like when we first launched. I tried to point out that the reason that they felt this way is because we used to play the game this way all of the time. It shouldn't be that surprising or different. Let's all remember the surprising thing back then was actually having 2 tanks. This is kind of why I want to see this on the PTR or in the arcade. I don't necessarily think that this should be hitting competitive anytime soon, if at all, but I don't like the idea of people sat behind their PCs lamenting this idea, saying it's terrible, without at least trying it out themselves. I think that there is a benefit to the idea of just trying this, and that's certainly what Jeff Kaplan is trying to get across with this article as a whole. That's not the main thing that I wanted to highlight in this video, to be honest. The post itself doesn't really give us that much interesting information, other than maybe changing Roadhog to a DPS hero, but again, the general tone of this post as a whole is, hey, we've been playing with this, we're not quite sure if it's something that we want to chase, but we wanted to let you guys know this, and that is the important part about this. Blizzard are terrible at giving us any information. We got some last week with the Joshua No post that of course got a lot of negative feedback because he dismissed the idea of power creep in a sense, but quickly came in and corrected himself and what he actually meant. I'm not going to sit here and say that The only good thing about this is the fact that Blizzard chose to tell us it's not that simple, but it's the fact that Blizzard have dedicated 2 months to this idea, really dedicating to trying to make it work and try and fix all of the challenges on a system that may not even see the light of day. Now, for a lot of people, they may go, what is the point of that? But that's game development as a whole. Overwatch as a game came from the failed playtest, I suppose, of a massive MMO titan. If Blizzard are wasting their time brainstorming and trying out this idea, then I hate to think of how many months or years of the development cycle that they've wasted, because so many ideas just don't hit the light of day. But this is something that they've put a lot of time into. This is something that they've actively thrown out to the community to get feelers for. They wouldn't have thrown this out if they didn't want our opinion or our perspective. But another hugely important area that I've seen nobody really highlight is that clearly Blizzard are not happy with the state of the game for them to try out these really drastic, dramatic changes that could just break Overwatch. Blizzard are willing to go to that length to do something just ridiculous in order to make the game better. This is on the back of a PTR patch that people said wasn't enough. And balance-wise, sure, Blizzard could have done a lot more to the likes of Baptiste, Orisa and May, but it shows really where Blizzard's head's at. The balance isn't a huge focus for them, it's just how the whole roll-lock system comes into play. And I think that's a huge thing that says about where Blizzard is heading at the moment. Not only that, they're willing to take us along for the ride too. I'm interested in the idea of a 3-2-1 roll-lock composition, but I'm not deeply invested in it. I think it highlights some of the cool challenges that they run into, the first of which being the off-tanks, how they would have to change Divas, Zarya and Roadhog to either be main tanks or damage heroes. I also thought it was very interesting that they didn't mention Sigma, really showing that they do see Sigma as this hybrid hero, which I think does make the game a lot worse. We'll talk about that in another video. There'd be a lot more pressure on tank players that would specifically be playing main tanks. They would have a lot more pressure on their shoulders to pick the right option and the right hero. And it would also mean that you would be in Orisa jail forever up until a new main tank becomes meta, and then you'd be stuck playing them. There's no diversity in hero choice if you're playing to win and playing competitively, unless you're in a lower rank. But there'd be far too much focus on them being the sole tank, which would make life a living hell. Some players would enjoy it, some may not. Supports complained that they felt that too much was going on, and they felt bad trying to keep the sole tank alive and fail to. That wasn't mentioned in this post is the amount of damage being thrown around and how that has creeped up over time. Having one tank to try and block and mitigate all that damage, I don't think it's going to go very well. They're going to get absolutely deleted a good portion of the time. So I'm not going to sit here and say that this is coming to the game, Roadhog's getting a massive rework. I'm not going to bullshit you guys like that. But I do think that it's important to really highlight that this post that Jeff has put out is incredibly important, not for what is specifically said, but what they're suggesting, what they've been honest about, and how they're communicating that information. We have never got this much information on something that may not happen before, ever, from Blizzard. Blizzard are notorious for holding things to the last second and then announcing it. Roll-lock. We knew that Roll-lock was kind of coming via leaks and stuff, but Blizzard never turned around and said, hey, we are trying this system out. Here are some of the problems that we have that we're trying to fix. And who knows, if we got a post like this about Roll-lock 222 way back when, the community may have gone, actually, Roll-lock doesn't sound like that much of a good idea, especially for DPS plays because of the DPS queues. And I think that this communication is imperative for Blizzard and Overwatch to succeed in the future. I've seen a couple of people say, clearly this is why Blizzard and Overwatch is out of touch, because they've been playing 3-2-1 for the last 2 months and not the game that we're all playing ourselves, which I completely get. They're effectively playtesting and playing a completely different game to the one that we're playing, and that's not necessarily a nice thing to experience. But Blizzard is willing to go to these drastic areas where they can dedicate months at a time to a simple idea fix to try out, and even try and fix some of the hardcore challenges that they're going to face in order to make our game better. And that is huge, I feel. Especially when people criticize Blizzard for not doing enough to try and fix the game. This is a sign that not only they are working their asses off to try and do something a bit different in order to improve the game, they're willing to communicate their failings with us, I suppose. Personally, I would love to see this change on the PTR or in the arcade at some point. I would love to see people at least have the option to try it out and see for themselves before they turn around and say this is a terrible idea. We've even seen devs themselves go from saying this is a stupid idea to this reminds me of old Overwatch. And I think that we shouldn't knock it until we try it, personally. And if